Hi, everyone. Welcome to the talk on Computable Guidelines on Android. I think it's also a nice continuation from the earlier talk on CPG 2.0. Just to introduce myself, my name is Divya. I am a software engineer at Google. I've been working in health just for about 3 years, but it's been really great. It's been something that I'm very passionate about, so I'm really excited to be here and to learn from all of you. So with respect to this talk, here are a few things that we're going to cover today. So we're going to learn a little bit about requests and the activity flow that are defined in the Clinical Practice Guidelines Implementation Guide. We did see a little bit in the earlier talk, but we'll go a little bit into some detail. And we'll go over, we'll get an overview of Google's Open Health Stack and Android FHIR SDK. And more specifically, we will look at the workflow library in the Android FHIR SDK and look at the activity APIs, which can be used to manage requests and the activity flow as defined in the CPG-IG. So why do we have this talk today? So one thing that we've noticed is that there is a big gap in tooling for clinical guidelines. The CPG-IG is very comprehensive. It's also very complex. And we don't really have the tools to kind of simplify it. The activity flow specifically involves a lot of change. Like the management of FHIR requests is kind of complex. It goes through status and intent changes. And we don't really have the tools to help manage that. Like for example, if we look at happy structures, they can manage FHIR models. We have the CQL engine for anything CQL related and decision support related. But we are hoping that the activity APIs is one step closer to bridging the gap for clinical guidelines. So just to give you an overview for some of you who might not be familiar, the Open Health Stack is a suite of open source components that helps developers build healthcare applications quickly, especially in low resource settings. I've just shared some links to documentations and earlier DevDays talks to cover the different parts of the Open Health Stack, which is like the Android FHIR SDK, data pipes, and info gateway. In our talk, we will be focusing more on the FHIR SDK side of it, which is a suite of Kotlin libraries that can help you build FHIR-based apps on Android. The long-term vision, of course, is to make it multi-platform, and Jing has a great talk on this a little later today. But we will specifically focus on the workflow library in the FHIR SDK. This is just an overview of the FHIR SDK architecture. We've got the STC library, the workflow library, the FHIR engine, and the knowledge manager. Coming to the workflow library. So this is mainly for decision support and also clinical analytics. But we will actually focus on the last part, which is the activity APIs, which is fairly new. And we hope that this can help make it easier to implement activity flow as defined in the CPG-IG. This is just a quick overview of the workflow library architecture. So before we get into the details, in case you're not completely aware, this is just a quick refresher of the general workflow pattern in FHIR. So there are typically 3 types of resources. We have definitions, which are resources that define what can be done. And examples of this are plan definitions, activity definitions. And then we have requests, which are resources that describe things that are desired to be done. So examples of this are resources like communication request and medication request. And then finally, we have resources that define that describe things that have been done. So these are things like communication, medication dispense, immunization. And the activity API aim to actually simplify this pattern. You might have seen this graph in the earlier talk if you attended. But this is generally how the activity flow is defined. And it shows you the relationship between definitions, requests, and events. So as you can see, we actually have, so definition, typically how it works is you would have the apply operation on a plan definition. You would get some request resources out of that. These requests are proposals which can go through different phases. So it can go from proposal to plan to order. And when that's completed, it actually translates to an event, which is actually like, in this case, it could be dispensing medication and when your request is a medication request. And if you look at the graph a little closely, look at this chart a little closely, you realize that as the phases change, you actually duplicate resources and you link them back to the to the resource in the previous phase that it was derived from. So management of these request resources and event resources is kind of complicated. And it is a bit difficult for the average software developer sometimes without that kind of clinical context. So how do we translate the activity flow to the activity APIs? So we actually have an activity flow class, which is the starting point. So the activity flow is created for a request or an event resource. And this is because you can either start it from the first phase of the activity lifecycle, which is the proposal stage, or you can resume it at any other phase. And it maintains the current phase, which you can get from the get current phase API. Which brings us to the phase. So there are 4 types of phases. First, we have the proposal phase, the plan phase, and the order phase, which are phases defined for the request. And then we have the perform phase, which is defined for the event. And each phase has prepare and initiate APIs that help you manage creation of requests in the next phase, and then management of the status and backlinking to requests in the previous phase. I know it sounds complicated, but I will get to how we simplify it, and I hope that you understand at the end of it. So coming to the activity APIs. So the activity APIs manage the workflow of clinical recommendations according to the CPG-IG. They allow you to take proposals through different phases, from the proposal phase to the plan phase to the order phase, and then finally performing the event. We have the CPG request resource and the CPG event resource, which abstract out the request and event resources that are defined by the CPG-IG. So request resources, as we saw, are resources like the communication request and the medication request, and event resources are resources like communication, medication dispense, etc. And the CPG request resource and CPG event resource, they act as a wrapper around the request and event resources, and they help you manage the intent and the status and the based on fields, which will help you link all these resources together. So if we look at the CPG request resource, as we saw, it is actually it abstracts out request resources that are defined in the CPG-IG. It has update APIs to update it. And you can just create it using the off static factory from the relevant request resource. So one thing that needs to be remembered is that the request resource pattern has these status codes, and different request resources have different status codes. So there is a need to map it to the request pattern. And for that, we have a status code mapper interface. So whenever you have an implementation for a new request resource, this mapper has to be created for that. Along similar lines, we have the CPG event resource, which is a wrapper around event resources. Similarly, we have update APIs. You can use the off static factory for the respective resource. And we also have an event status code mapper, which is an interface which allows you to provide the mapping between the status codes for any specific event resource, CPG event resource, to the event resource pattern. Okay, so now we come to the activity flow creation. So the activity flow class, as I mentioned, it is actually, you derive it, it is linked to either a request or an event. It can start with the request at the proposal stage, and you can take it through different phases, as we saw in the block diagram earlier. So it can go from proposal to plan to order, and then to the perform stage where you create an event resource. You can also use it to resume at any point. So you can start the flow with the proposal state, or you can resume it at any phase in the activity flow. And yeah, you can just see how there's a snippet of code that tells you how you can create it. Typically, so this shows you how you would get a medication request proposal, for instance, after a plan definition apply operation, and then you can start the activity flow right from the proposal phase, but you can start it at any phase. As I showed you earlier, the activity flow also has, it maintains the current phase, and you can access that using the get current phase API, and you can manage it from there as well. For each phase, we have prepare and initiate APIs to manage transition between phases. So the prepare API actually creates the new request. So this will create new requests. You can manage the status. You can set the, it will handle the backlinking of a request to the request in the previous phase, but it will not actually persist it in the repository. For that, you have the initiate API, which actually does make changes to the current phase and then persists that in the repository. And you can just take a look at the code, which gives you an example of how you can move from the proposal phase to the plan phase. So in this case, you have the prepare plan API, you have the initiate plan API. Similarly, you will have things like prepare order and initiate order. We also have the update API, which can allow you to change the state of a request. So an example of this is when you actually set, when you want to, for example, mark a request as active. There could also be other scenarios where you want to pause or you want to terminate a request for whatever reason. It could be due to a clinical intervention or something. So the update APIs can actually be used to change the state of the request. Or yeah, you can also use it to mark it as complete. So obviously it's been a little bit confusing, but I thought of showing you how you can put everything together with an example. So right now we just have the FHIR engine repository here. So let's take the example of dispensing a medication. So that's the activity that we will run through for now. So in this case, we're starting from the proposal phase. So we have a medication request that has been generated after a plan definition apply operation. So it is in the proposal phase. It's a draft, and you can see that the based on field is null. And we are initializing an activity flow at this state. And just for simplicity's sake, we've given the ID as 1, and you'll see why that becomes important later. So now what we do is, in the prepare and initiate plan phase, we actually get the current phase, which is the proposal, and we can now mark the proposal as active. Now we will move to the prepare and initiate plan phase. So in this case, you can see that when we run the prepare plan API, and now what has happened is we have actually created a new request, and the intent is plan. So one thing to note is that the intent field is immutable. So when we actually move phases, we're creating new resources. So we create a new medication request of intent plan and status draft, and we have made sure to link it to the request that it was derived from, which is the proposal. And the initiate plan API will actually persist it in the FHIR engine repository. As we move on to the next stage, we extract the current phase, which is now plan, and we can mark the plan as active. Now you can see that we're calling prepare order, which again creates a new request. Its order is now intent, its status is draft, and it is based on the earlier plan. And then when we call the initiate order API, it is persisted, and if you notice, the plan has been marked as complete. So now we can go to the next step and actually mark the order as active. And then finally, what we have to do is now the next step is actually the perform phase. So when we do this, it's now the event that is created when we do the prepare perform operation. So now the event medication dispense is created, its status is preparation, and it is linked back to the order, which is now marked as complete. And this is kind of how you see the activity APIs handling the status changes and the backlinking of resources, and sort of managing some of the slightly complicated elements of the activity flow in the CPG-IG. I think to conclude, I would say that the CPG-IG in its current state is a little bit complex. We definitely need a lot more tooling. The activity APIs is definitely not complete. We have it implemented for 2 types of activities, which is sending messages and dispensing medication. But yeah, we welcome the community to create PRs and help us expand it to cover more cases, more activities. Thank you.
Thank you. I always find it really interesting to see how you design APIs to simplify these kind of flows. I mean, earlier or later, as software developers, we have to create APIs, and a good API makes stuff discoverable and usable, and I really like what I saw. So, well done. All right, questions?
Did you say this was only for Android, or is this, I missed the beginning part. Is this an Android-only toolkit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a part of the workflow library in the Android FHIR SDK. Yes. Go for it. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, we do want to make the Android FHIR SDK multi-platform. So I think Jing wants to add to that.
Yeah, just add. The code itself, right, is, I mean, the logic is all written in Kotlin, so there's no reason that it has to be Android specific. It could be, it's kind of interoperable with Java, etc. But actually, I was also going to bring up this point and ask a question maybe to the CPG authors. If you see this being sort of a reference implementation that could be upstreamed to an example repo, because the bit that's really Android specific in our code is just the bit that reads and writes the resources. Yeah. So that can completely be, so the logic can completely be extracted. And so I don't know what's because I feel like this is something that needs to be implemented once and people don't have to redo this, right? Because a lot of the linking and state changes is very specific to the definitions in the CPG-IG. So I don't know, maybe it's a question back to you. What do you think we should do with this?
Yes, I don't think we should write that over and over again.
No.
So, yeah.
Yeah, just abstract the storage stuff and yeah, for sure. More questions? I guess another question to the IG authors. So I mean, we're doing this stuff like just kind of in a, just as a like in the same process, right? But how do you see this being maybe converted to like either server or some kind of operations? And in that case, do you see the IG being extended, or then this can be, this code might live on the server somehow rather than sort of a client implementation?
This API, it is based on just the workflow and request and event definition patterns in FHIR. The CPG profiles there make sure that all they're really doing is making sure that you can tie back to the definitions in CPG. As part of this work in STU2, we put together like pseudocode for all of these different operations, and that's what this API is based on. But we think that you could probably define those just as operations. So just do operation definitions instead of pseudocode. Operation definitions with semantics. And then you could maybe it happens in process with this Android API, but maybe it happens on a REST API if you expose it as a server. So.
I think I also want to give a shout out to Bryn for like helping us understand this. The pseudocode that he talked about is actually super helpful.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
And then, so that shout out goes right back to Lloyd. He actually understand what the whole workflow.
Right, right.
Because before STU2, I did not know that those requests that's really important.
Ireland is today, right? We have immutable stuff, really? So I thought maybe we should have a tutorial. We should probably do a tutorial on the whole event pattern stuff as well, right? Because when you started explaining the event pattern, and I was like, yeah, I haven't heard anything about it for a long time. You explained it actually rather well, so I think we need it too.
Yeah, talking about the workflow and event stuff, how much is actually part of the CPG IG, and how would be the possibility to take your approach to other IGs with other resources, but still workflow event separation?
I am not sure. I think Bryn probably has an answer to that.
And we know now, if Bryn doesn't know, we should ask Lloyd, right? That's the chain of events.
So most of what's in the CPG request and event profiles is just saying that you have to support the fields that are used to tie back and follow that activity flow. So most of it isn't really about CPG. It's just that a big part of what we're doing in CPG is trying to provide guidance about delivery of care. And that workflow pattern in FHIR covers a lot of ground, but it doesn't give a lot of very specifics about specific guidance about how you do it. And so this, we think, is a gap there. It certainly was on the CPG side. So we could probably upstream some of it. Yeah. Quite a bit of it.
Yeah, so you get something between the full free workflow patterns and CPG with reusable stuff for other, that's what you're saying.
Right, because a lot of what you have to do is you get a proposal from a guidance. What do you do with it? Well, you've got to turn it into a plan if they want to do it later, or you've got to authorize it as an order if they want to do it now. And then it goes to the pharmacy and you've got to dispense it. There's workflow associated with that isn't specific to CPG. It just, we needed a way to say it and talk about it. So.
Yeah, I don't have a next session, so we can go on forever, but we're out of time. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to our presenters. Thank you.